is it? It is
March 5th.
Tuesday, March 5th. It's a regular meeting of the Planning Commission. I'm glad everybody is safe and here. We're in numbers from our Snowmageddon last week. We reserve the first 10 minutes for public comment. And before I go into it, I just want to see, are there people from the public? Because we don't have any green forms. Sometimes it's hard to tell if you're all staff. Okay, so nobody's here from the public.
A couple public members.
Okay, but no public, oh, yes, of course. Any public comment? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so nothing to say. Okay. Well, you'll get another opportunity at the end if for some reason the people from the public, the two, are inspired. So we'll move to agenda item B, which is going to be by Eric Brown. It's, oh, no.
Yeah, sorry.
We wanted. Did we switch the order?
Yeah, there's a request from that team
Okay,
to switch it up.
perfect, got it, no worries. We're going to start with the work session capital improvement program 2025 and Michael Streepy.
All right. I am Mike Streepy. I'm an analyst with the Finance Division. And with me today, I have Matt Rodriguez, the City Engineer, and Jeff Perry, the Facilities Division Manager. We're going to go through the CIP, and then I will turn it over to Matt to go through individual program areas and Jeff to go through the Facilities program area, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. So I'd like to take a step back and go over what the CIP is, its purpose, and why we produce one. The CIP is essentially a multi-year capital planning document that serves as a roadmap for the city's capital projects for the next 6 fiscal years. The CIP helps achieve all the things you see here. It identifies capital needs, prioritizes requests, helps focus organizational goals, helps build consensus and community awareness, and helps ensure financial stability. By aligning projects with anticipated funding levels over the 6-year planning period. Because capital projects are resource intensive, they require a lot of planning, and to complete, developing a multi-year plan like the CIP is recognized as a best practice for local governments. However, the CIP is also not produced in a vacuum. There's a number of factors that shape the projects in the city's capital expenditure plan. This is, they're in large part determined by the factors you see here on this slide. Prior plans and studies, which Matt and Jeff will go into in more detail for each program area. This includes master planning documents, as well as citywide guides like Envision Eugene, the downtown plan, the Climate Recovery Ordinance 2021 World Championships, etc. Capital replacement programs, these support projects that upgrade existing assets, expand functionality, or enhance service levels. Maintenance monitoring programs refers to things like the facility condition report, the wastewater monitoring program, the pavement preservation program. Also, the community's values and public participation processes filter through via community surveys, elections, input from neighborhood associations. The CIP funding restrictions and diversity of services both impact the composition of CIP projects as well. Finally, specific council goals like community livability are reflected in CIP projects, including those like the permanent farmers market, the park blocks improvements, or the downtown riverfront park and plaza. This diagram shows the basic process by which a project goes from an idea to construction and use. Once a need is identified, then more detailed plans are made to align the project with available funds. Once funding and project plans are in place, the CIP is developed and presented to the Budget Committee. The role of the Budget Committee in this process is to review the CIP prior to council adoption. This provides a feedback mechanism through comments from the public at large, in addition to feedback from the citizen members of the committee prior to City Council adoption. Once council approves the CIP, capital projects become part of the city manager's proposed capital budget, which must receive appropriation authority through the budget process. The first 2 years of the CIP, FY 20 and 21 will form the basis of the capital budget in those years. Once appropriations are made, a whole range of project planning, implementation activities then occur, including engineering and design, procurement and contracting, coordination with partners, inspection, etc. So we've incorporated 3 big changes in this CIP compared to previous iterations. We've included greenhouse gas emissions estimates for CIP projects. This is a new initiative in response to a Budget Committee motion passed in 2017. This was the city's first attempt at producing this type of information on a wide scale, and we expect these efforts to continue to evolve in the future, along with climate recovery work in other areas of the city. In addition to the GHG estimates, we've produced additional narrative to highlight different climate efforts across program areas. This provides more context to the GHG data that's in the CIP. Finally, changes have been made to provide more information on specific capital projects within ongoing capital programs. For the first 2 years of the CIP, individual capital projects have detailed financial and project information. This builds on efforts to increase financial transparency through tools like the Open Budget website, which also will include interactive maps for the FY 20 projects included in the CIP. The GHG findings from the CIP align closely with the source of emissions community-wide, which are shown here. The CIP estimates indicate that our largest source of emissions is paving projects due to the large quantity of required construction materials. With our buildings and facilities, there are several planned projects that will realize some energy efficiency gains and reduce emissions from ongoing operations. However, as part of the Parks Bond, there are plans to expand the footprint of some of our rec centers and pools that will likely increase energy usage on an ongoing basis. Finally, the CIP includes a number of multimodal projects that have the potential to result in reduced emissions community-wide by promoting safe, efficient options for bike and pedestrian travel. Here's the financial breakdown of the CIP by program area. This represents total spending for the next 6 fiscal years, which is projected to be nearly $313 million. Transportation is the largest program area, $92 million, followed by airport at $83 million, facilities, parks and open space, wastewater, and stormwater. The vast majority of proposed spending, with the exception of projects funded by the Parks and Rec Bond, is dedicated to maintain our existing infrastructure. This is essentially taking care of what we have already built, which is less costly over the long term than letting things fall into disrepair. I don't expect you to get everything on this chart. It's just kind of here to show you that the CIP is funded by a wide variety of sources. The vast majority of these sources are restricted for particular use according to local, state, or federal law. The exception is funding from the general fund, which is used primarily for our public buildings and facilities that don't qualify for use of designated funds. General capital projects funding, shown in the bottom right there in purple, represents about 8% of total planned spending. And now I'll turn over to Matt to go over the public works projects.
All right, good evening, commissioners. As Mike said, I'm Matt Rodriguez. I'm the city engineer, and I'm here to share the public works portion of the CIP with you this evening. We're going to go through 5 program areas: the airport, parks and open space, stormwater, transportation, and wastewater. As part of the presentation, I'll give a brief overview of each service area, talk about the specific guides, the funding sources, and have example projects and programs. While there are a number of guidance documents, policies, and goals that apply across program areas, 3 guides that I wanted to highlight as impactful across all program areas are the Climate Recovery Ordinance, the Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan, and Envision Eugene. While I won't go into detail on how programs and projects relate to these guides as part of the presentation, I'm happy to answer questions about that when we're through. So we'll start with the airport. Eugene Airport is a vital link in our region for commercial air service, air cargo operations, and general aviation. In 2018, the airport had approximately 1.1 million total passengers and approximately 1.2 million pounds of cargo that was emplaned. That's just over an 8% increase in passengers and 4% increase in cargo from 2017. To support these operations, the focus of the Eugene Airport for the immediate future is economic development, customer service improvements, and the preservation and maintenance of existing assets, primarily airfield pavements. Projects in the CIP include functional and safety improvements, including landslide ingress, egress, rental car facilities, and airfield geometry corrections, preservation and maintenance of runway and taxiway pavements, and an airport terminal planning study in addition to terminal building Concourse C.
Can I ask you a quick question? Do you want us to wait till the end of the presentation to ask questions, or would you prefer, because of the level of detail, that it's, how do you want to do this?
Why don't we go through it and then ask
Okay.
questions, just so we
Right.
make sure we make it through?
Okay, so just make notes if
that's
there's a
okay.
level of detail. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So these are the specific guides that guide our airport investments. Eugene Airport's capital projects receive the majority of their funding from Federal Aviation Administration grants, passenger facility charges, and customer facility charges. The balance of funding labeled airport construction comes from the Municipal Airport Fund, which is derived from airport parking fees, terminal rents, fees from other operations, and passenger and customer facility charges. This funding is typically used as local match for FAA-funded projects. An example of a recent airport CIP project is the airport terminal building, which underwent a $19 million renovation and expansion in 2017. This project relocated and expanded the security screening checkpoint, created a new B-gate holding room, installed 2 new baggage claim carousels, and replaced aging elevators and escalators. The funding was a combination of passenger facility charges, FAA funds, and airport construction funds. This project significantly improved the customer experience by providing more efficient space for TSA passenger screening, enhanced ADA accessibility, and in general made the airport a more welcoming place. So Parks and Open Space. Our Parks and Open Space owns and stewards over 5,000 acres of land, approximately 3,500 acres of which is natural park areas. These parks are managed to maximize ecosystem benefits while meeting public use habitat and other needs. This connected system of natural areas, developed parks, vegetated stormwater facilities, and urban forest support natural processes and that improve air and water quality, sequester carbon, and provide recreational and renewal opportunities for our community. Projects in the CIP include renovation and rehabilitation of parks, renovation and expansion of park systems such as lighting and irrigation, land acquisition, habitat restoration, and development of new parks. These are the guides for investments in parks and open space. Park system development charges are the primary and ongoing capital funding for park and open space acquisitions and park improvements. With the passage of the 2018 Parks and Rec bond, significant additional funding is programmed in the CIP over the next 5 years. A limited amount of capital funding from the city's general fund is available for rehabilitation and renovation of existing assets. Unfunded future system needs include trail development, neighborhood park upgrades, and development of additional water play features. This is Amazon Playground, which was renovated in 2018. The popularity of this community park playground, along with its roots in providing accessible play, made for an opportunity to go beyond standard ADA requirements and build a modern, fully inclusive playground. Funding was pooled from a variety of sources, including federal and state grants, donations by Eugene Parks Foundation, Parks SDCs, and dedicated accessibility funding. So this is a good example of a renovation project. This is Delta Ponds Loop Trail. So this is a project that is in the CIP, scheduled for construction in 2020. A longtime goal of our park system is connecting the full loop on this trail. It's a 1.5-mile loop, but it has a disconnected segment in the northeast corner that will have a bridge constructed. The bridge will be funded in a combination of Parks and Rec bonds and Parks SDCs. The downtown Riverfront Park is slated for completion by 2021 and will be the first new park constructed in Eugene in 10 years. A thorough community engagement process is still underway and has already engaged and sparked the imagination of thousands of residents. A number of funding sources are coming together to fund this important park where downtown meets the river. They include Parks and Transportation SDCs, the 2018 Parks and Recreation Bond, and pedestrian and bicycle funds from the 2017 Street Bond. Now we'll move to the stormwater system. The city's stormwater capital improvement projects focus on improving water quality, increasing resilience through flood control, preservation and rehabilitation of existing pipes, and enhancing and restoring natural systems. Stormwater projects in the CIP include wetland mitigation bank capital projects, rehabilitation and improvement projects such as stream restoration, dry well elimination, system rehabilitation, and water quality facilities, and upgrades and capacity enhancement projects. And these are the specific guides for investments in stormwater. Major funding sources for stormwater include utility fees and stormwater system development charges. The 2018 Parks and Recreation Bond includes funding for the Amazon Creek Restoration Project that I'll talk about in a second, and Wetlands Mitigation Bank funds support improvement and expansion of those facilities. So this shows on the left the portion of Amazon Creek that is a concrete line channel between 19th and 24th Avenues. On the right, you see a section of Amazon Channel that was restored with the banks laid back between Garfield and Chambers. Is that right? I think it's right. So what our project from 19th to 24th is really trying to naturalize that system and make it look a lot more like the picture on the right. So that's removing the concrete walls, laying back the banks, creating a low flow channel, and creating habitat along the corridor and improving water quality. That project is funded for construction in 2021. So vegetated water quality facilities filter runoff, infiltrate water into the soil, and slow the flow of water into the receiving waters, reducing peak flows and stream erosion. We have an ongoing program to construct facilities opportunistically to improve water quality along our system. Typically, we try to site them on high-volume streets, such as arterials, so that we're having the maximum water quality benefit for the placement there. And the reason for that is that we get a lot of, there's metals and other things, debris that come off of those high-traffic streets that it's really advantageous to treat with the vegetated water quality facilities. So replacement, repair, and upgrade of old stormwater piping. This is an ongoing program with annual projects that repair systems under existing streets, and we focus a lot of this work on repairing systems before we come through and repave streets so that we make sure that we don't have to come back in within a 10-year window, hopefully, cut a street we just paved and repair a pipe system. We also focus on eliminating street flooding problems with this program. So transportation. Our transportation system provides mobility and accessibility for people and movement of goods within the city and region. The city strives to provide a smart, safe, resilient, and sustainable transportation system through multimodal planning and project implementation, innovative construction techniques, and modernizing our traffic signal system technology and operations. Projects in the CIP include a significant investment in preservation of our streets, improvements to transportation safety, seismic upgrades to bridges to increase resilience of our system, active transportation projects and multimodal improvements to streets, and updating our traffic signal system technology. And these are the specific guides that we use for investments in transportation. The majority of the transportation funding program in the CIP is dedicated to pavement preservation and includes funds from the 2017 Street Bond, local gas tax revenue, and the reimbursement component of transportation SDCs. The stormwater and wastewater funds shown here are programmed exactly as I kind of spoke about in the last slide, at least for stormwater, to basically go in and repair the pipes in front of the paving project. So we not only do that for stormwater, but we do that for wastewater as well. And we also coordinate with our utilities, Northwest Natural Gas and EWEB primarily, to make sure that they're doing that same kind of work before we come in and pave. Active transportation and multimodal projects are funded by a mix of federal funds, road fund general capital, and 2017 street bond and transportation SDCs. State gas taxes are primarily focused on funding safety and operational changes and technology upgrades for our traffic signal system. And lastly, seismic bridge resilience projects included in the CIP are funded with federal funds with a local match of transportation SDCs. So this is an example of one of our bond-funded street repair projects. What you can see in the left is a process we call in-place cement treated base. And what's innovative about this process is we come in and remove the asphalt layer that's there, take that back to the plants to be recycled. We then bring in a large piece of equipment called a reclaimer that you can see in the foreground of that picture on the left. It basically acts as a large rototiller, takes the subgrade soils and if base rock, if it's there, mixes it together. We add cement slurry, and we add more water. It mixes together and it creates a in-place cement treated base. And what we like about this process is that it reduces hauling all the old material that wouldn't have been suitable offsite, bringing new material in. It's much faster than a typical reconstruction project, and it actually has a better finished product to pave upon. You can also see in the bottom right picture that not only did we just pave, but we did, this is intersection of West Amazon and Fox Hollow. We did curb extensions, we added crosswalk striping, and we buffered the existing bike lane there to get more separation between people biking and people driving. In 2018, we used about 42,000 tons of what we call warm mix asphalt. You may have heard of this before, but another kind of innovative paving process we have is using warm mix. And what it is it's asphalt that is produced at a lower temperature, and it's about 50 degrees lower than typically it's made. Reduces it below the temperature that causes smoke, the burning that occurs, so you don't get that emission on site. Also significantly reduces greenhouse gases and cost because we're not using as much energy to produce it. And we've been one of the leaders in the state in using that process for a number of years. So this example is West 7th Place in the upper left, and in the bottom right, North Park Avenue. So West 7th Place was another paving project. We did this last summer. What's unique about this is that we went in and took a street cross section that was 2 lanes eastbound and 1 westbound. We did an analysis and figured out we didn't need that much eastbound capacity. And we went to a 3-lane section, so 1 lane in each direction, a center turn lane, and then bike lanes. Not only did that provide, the multimodal aspect of the project and put in an upgrade for bike facilities on the corridor, but this cross section of 3 lanes versus 3 lanes where you have 2 in opposing directions and 1 center turn lane reduces crashes about 30% from what was there previously. In the bottom right, on North Park Avenue, we used 2012 bond funds to do sidewalk infill to connect to Howard Elementary and then put in a marked crossing for kids that are going to school there. So that's an example of how we use paving projects to really take advantage of multimodal opportunities and then pair that with other funding sources. So this is the Jessen Path. It was constructed this last summer. It's a new shared use path in Bethel neighborhood connecting the Beltline path to the community to the west. Project was about $2.1 million and predominantly funded with federal grants and a local match. And it's a good example of how we're leveraging federal funds to build our active transportation network. So lastly, wastewater. Our wastewater program is predominantly focused on rehabilitation of the existing system to address structural issues and reduce inflow of stormwater and infiltration of groundwater into the pipe network. Reducing the amount of water that the treatment plant needs to clean has a direct effect on energy use at the plant and retains capacity of that system for future development and redevelopment. Projects in the CIP include rehabilitation of the pipe system, reconstruction of the West Irwin pump station, which I'll talk about a little bit more, as well as construction of new capital facilities. So these are the wastewater specific guides we use. And one thing I'll point out, so you can see the image of Eugene there, and you can see a whole bunch of lines and a whole bunch of numbers, but not very well. What that is actually a wastewater system model that we've refined over the last 2 years. So prior to that, we had a model that wasn't very workable, so we couldn't use it for data-led investments in our system to regain capacity from inflow and infiltration, and then be able to analyze as new development comes in whether or not there's a problem with capacity. So we're really excited that we've invested in this work, and we now have the system to really be able to have data-led decision-making around how we manage our system and build capacity into it. So primary funding sources for wastewater are utility fees and wastewater SDCs. This one's pretty simple. We use a suite of trenchless pipe rehabilitation techniques on our system to get that watertight system and also to repair some structural defects. What you're seeing here is a picture of a liner. It's a resin impregnated felt, and they actually blow it into the pipe. They blow it into the pipe and then they put steam through it and it cures it in place, and it creates basically a new plastic pipe inside of whatever is already there. Typically it's concrete or maybe PVC that has had some failure. So again, that helps us get capacity back, but it also adds some level of resilience against earthquake event. It's going to reduce the number of breaks that we have in the system. It won't eliminate it, but it does give us some resilience aspect as well. So the West Irwin Pump Station was constructed in 1964. It serves over 3,000 acres in Eugene. The current design is a safety hazard to the folks that maintain it, so it was a high priority to do improvements to it, and also is seismically vulnerable. So this is a project that was a high priority for us to invest in, and basically this will reconstruct. We don't completely have the scope nailed down specifically yet, but we believe we'll probably end up reconstructing the whole thing in order to address those issues of safety, seismic resilience, and potentially even capacity, because there is a link to this pump station and development in the Clear Lake Road area within the UGB expansion. And I think that's it for me. I'll hand it to Jeff.
Great. Thanks, Matt. I will be talking about public buildings and related capital projects and initiatives facility management divisions responsible for. I'll talk about some of the projects we've completed and highlight some of the projects we're working on with CIP dollars. The city maintains a diverse number of public facilities, including community centers, swimming pools, fire stations, parking structures, government office buildings, park facilities, the Holt Center, and the Eugene Library. In all, the city maintains and preserves more than 100 general fund buildings totaling almost 1 million square feet. The city also provides new and expanded facilities to meet the needs of a growing community. Public buildings and facilities projects are derived from several adopted plans and facility condition reports. Examples include the Parks and Rec System Plan, the Americans with Disabilities Act Transition Plan, the 2017 Facility Condition Report, the Public Works Facilities Master Plan, Urban Renewal Plans, and the Parking Structure Condition Analysis. Capital improvement dollars for general fund public facilities are allocated through the following project categories. Facility preservation and maintenance. These projects preserve, maintain, and repair systems associated with existing facilities. This category is divided into 4 preservation and maintenance programs. This includes health, safety, and welfare projects, primary building systems, secondary building systems, and building service systems. Examples of projects in this category include roofing and siding replacement, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing repairs, interior finishes, fire suppression systems, and building controls. Individual facility preservation and maintenance projects are often include funding from multiple program areas. Site and facility improvements. Projects in this category include modifications or additions to existing facilities to meet operational, safety, and cost efficiency goals, and to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. The primary goal of this program is to address changing program functions and needs to improve service delivery. These types of projects have limited impact on facility operating costs as their purpose is to upgrade or reconfigure space for more effective service delivery. This category is organized into 2 program areas that include general site and facility improvements, or what we call B1 projects, and ADA renovations. And finally, new capital facilities. So projects in this category typically provide for either new facilities or are projects that expand existing facilities and are of such scale to warrant classification as standalone projects. Large-scale facility changes that are needed to provide for community growth are found in this category of projects as well. The Facility Management Division also assists with department-funded enhancement projects, such as the recently renovated kitchens at the Holt Center and Campbell Community Center, and the Silva Theater rigging system required for the Lion King production. The CIP includes $32 million allocated for the city's buildings and structures. The majority of the projects are funded with general fund project dollars and almost a quarter of the total funding will come from the Parks and Rec bond. $4.5 million from Urban Renewal Agency funds have also been identified for improvements at the Farmers Market, which was in part of the downtown URA plan amendments made by council. Next, I will discuss some of the projects our team is working on. As expected, there are several significant re-roofing projects budgeted for in the CIP. Here's a recent example of a roof replacement project at the Amazon Pool Bathhouse. Although the facility has been generally easy to maintain, the re-roofing project is complex due to the number of penetrations required for the solar hot water system and drainage issues related to the flat roof. As you can see, there's a lot of substantial pooling on the roof. The Alton Baker Shelter and Fire Station 2 are also scheduled for replacement in 2020, and the Facility Management Shop and Fire Logistics in 2021. The capital budget is also used for historic renovation projects. Some of the recent projects we've completed include replacement of the roof and renovation of the flooring at the McNeil Riley House, and window restoration and electrical upgrades at the Sheldon McMurphy Johnson House. We're also currently working on a boiler heating system replacement at SMJ and foundation repairs at the Morse Family Farm. Elevators in our parking garages and the library have been problematic and require major renovations and repairs. In 2018, the library staff elevator was modernized and upgraded with the remaining 3 lifts scheduled to be completed in the next several months. We are also planning to modernize the Holt Center lobby elevator in 2021. Utilizing parking funds, Facilities is assisting parking services to modernize 5 lifts in the Holt Garage, Parkade, and Pearl Street Garage this year. We're also supporting parking as they move forward with several major deck coating projects over the next several years. CIP funds are used to improve building safety and security, both for the public and city staff. We recently completed an extensive cooling tower water treatment project that ensures water evaporation produced by the system is safe to the public. We're also scheduled to replace the deteriorating deck at Lamb Cottage, which is a potential hazard to the public. Several security LED lighting upgrades have also been budgeted for to help enhance building safety and reduce vandalism. Equity in contracting continues to be a focus of the Facility Management Division and CIP funds. We are tracking participation through solicitation documents, utilizing the state of Oregon's co-bid database, and participating in open houses and reverse trade shows. Additionally, we recently reclassified one of our positions in facilities to concentrate on contracting and procurement best practices, including equity and contracting. The Climate Recovery Ordinance is a high priority for the capital budget. In 2016, Solarc Energy Group produced a report outlining several paths to meet CRO goals related to the operations of city buildings. Based on recommendations from the report, we are upgrading the HVAC system at the Police Property and Forensics Facility, which will switch the primary heating source from natural gas to electricity. The project not only improves performance and reduces energy use, but it virtually eliminates the use of natural gas and significantly reduces GHG emissions. Similar conversions will be considered for all major HVAC upgrades and system replacements. All of our lighting projects include upgrading to LEDs. We've supported parking services to convert several parking garages to LED lighting, and we are working with the Eugene Library on an ongoing LED conversion project. Another critical project we're working on is R22 refrigerant conversion in our HVAC systems, known to be harmful to the ozone and no longer available by 2020. We're working on a phased approach that will completely eliminate use of the project. One of the most exciting initiatives we're working on are the bond-funded recreation projects. The bond covers major renovations at Echo Hollow Pool, Campbell Community Center, and Sheldon Pool. We are currently in the public engagement, planning, and initial design stages for Echo and Campbell, and are planning to start construction within the next year. All of the projects will include renovations to address deferred maintenance of the decades-old facilities, and also add new amenities and features for the community. In addition to meeting a minimum LEED Silver certification, there are opportunities to further reduce energy use and operational GHG emissions on each project, which we're currently exploring. Facilities leverages several different technologies to track the condition of our facilities and respond to routine work requests. Our operations and maintenance team recently implemented a new work order system that makes work requests and maintenance easier to schedule and more efficient for our technicians in the field. We also utilize a predictive modeling tool and database to track the condition of all general fund buildings and structures. The system is also a cost model, which allows us to project a 10-year financial investment forecast. A key indicator we track in our database is the Facility Condition Index, or FCI, to determine a building's overall condition. The lower the FCI, the better. Our goal is to maintain a good FCI rating of 15% or lower. The pie chart here in this slide represents all general fund facilities, and as you can see, slightly less than 2/3 have a good FCI, and about a third rate is fair. A good example here is as we complete the bond-funded projects for recreation, we'll see that chart shift to a better overall FCI rating. Those are some of the buildings we see with the worst FCI condition. And then finally, this chart represents deficiencies by distress. And as you can see, almost 75% of our total deficiencies are because a system is beyond its projected service life. The good news here is that due to proactive preventative maintenance, preservation and maintenance, we were able to significantly extend the useful life of many of these building systems and that are technically beyond service life, but that helps reduce our long-term capital costs. I'll now hand it back over to Mike to discuss CIP timeline. Oh,
I was going to say you could just.
okay, sorry. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Just give a quick recap of the CIP. It aligns capital spending with available funding over the 6-year planning period, which is a best practice for local governments. The CIP also links capital projects with other planning processes happening throughout the city. Most of the projects in the CIP are primarily for maintaining or upgrading our current service system for infrastructure, and it's balanced across program areas to maintain the fiscal integrity of all the funding restrictions. And with that, I'm sure you have some comments, questions, and that's it.
Commissioner Baker?
I have a bunch of questions, so I will ask a few and then
Yeah.
let other people.
Before you start, I just want to make sure that you know that we have our next agenda item it could be quite large. I mean, depending on what kind of input you have so just keep that in mind, that this is an opportunity for learning, and you can always follow through with one or more of the staff if you have particular questions. Okay, Commissioner Baker.
Since there is a significant amount of money being spent at the airport, I just had several questions related to that. So as part of the energy tracking, do you track the energy use per square foot of that building on a monthly basis to see what's going on, or compare it with other buildings, other similar airport buildings?
We do in facilities. We track all energy use citywide and we get data in different ways, but we have an analyst that actually, that's their primary,
But you get it on a per building basis?
yes.
Okay. And since the airport buildings are heavily used almost 24 hours a day, there are some recent improvements to lighting and HVAC systems that are now used. Have you had a recent comprehensive energy audit of the facility to see if part of these other, upgrades you're doing, you wouldn't be able to include some energy upgrades?
That I'm not aware of, but I can follow up.
Okay. Just a suggestion, it would be useful to have a comprehensive energy audit whenever you're doing a major renovation of existing building, just so you know what and the reason I think it's important to track energy use is you can have a LEED gold building and then 2 years later something's wrong and you don't realize it's wrong, and it could run that way for years. So
To speak to that a little bit, and I can't speak for the airport directly because it's not general fund, not necessarily maintained by our division, but we do routinely retro commission a lot of our facilities, so where we go back and determine if the systems are working properly, especially your mechanical systems, and then tweak them, adjust them to make sure that they're running as expected or even improve the performance. And so we do that very routinely.
good. And then my questions were related, similar to parks, because some of those buildings are small, and so you're obviously not going to. But if you at least track energy on a monthly basis for the building, you could see if it's, one of these or one of these. You'd rather it be one of these.
We definitely do that. We also look at, just utility uses in general. So if there's a water leak, we'll track that down. And Parks is a great example because of their irrigation and whatnot. So.
Right, yeah.
Commissioner Baker, can I keep it going just because we
Well, I had one
this?
more thing I'd like to mention, and then I would switch it. It's a completely different area, but the stormwater and transportation, very often you're trenching, replacing some pipes. I think this last week is a good opportunity where it would make sense to try to nudge EWEB so that they, we have a problem in Eugene where something like a third of the city is served by above-ground utilities, which is where we had problems last week primarily. And even if they don't put in underground wiring now, they could put in the conduit when you put in your conduit. So it would be much, much cheaper to run it, to do things later, gradually underground the city, the way some California jurisdictions have already done over the years. So and I'll stop there. I'll come back.
Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you. I have a few things as well. First thing I want to ask is when you say funding identified, so you've done a 6-year financial plan, said this is how much it's going to be, $317 million in capital improvement. And you figured out this is how much money we've got, we're going to get this much from general fund. Do you count the $900,000 capital transfer into that amount, or that is not allocated? So at the end of the budget year, there's the $900,000 transfer if that's available from the beginning working capital. Is that?
It's in the CIP.
So
we back it out as part of the budget process.
So of the $317 million, $5.5 million of that is the marginal beginning working capital 900,000 transfer.
I believe so, yes.
See, and I don't think that's an appropriate way of doing that, because there are times when that's not available. And so to budget it, saying if we've got money left over at the end of the year, it goes to capital. And we're building our capital improvement plan on money that we think might be there. And so to say that funding is identified with that, I think is wrong. That's just one thing that I've had, a qualm that I've had for years. I'm really happy with the idea that you've done a greenhouse gas analysis to all of these projects. One of the things that after going through and looking at it, is this CIP doesn't take any greenhouse gases away. There's a couple of very minor ones. LED lightings in the library takes away a half a ton over this whole CIP, but there's significant increases in GHGs from the pools. And, you know, the transportation one, you can't really, to pave a street, it's going to put GHG into it. How, going forward, are we going to compensate for the increased greenhouse gases that we're adding with this CIP in order to meet the climate recovery plan?
So the way we calculated the GHG emissions for those projects, we didn't take into account the most aggressive energy efficient system we could come up with, just because we need to study it and determine if it's feasible financially to do that. There are actually really big opportunities to make progress. And so, for example, with Echo Hollow right now, even though, you know, all things being equal, it might be a GHG increase because we'll have some, you know, recreation pool outside and that sort of thing. But we're also looking at an electrified heat pump system instead of the traditional gas boiler.
Okay.
So.
The other thing I'd say is, you know, our climate recovery ordinance has a requirement for our internal city emissions to be carbon neutral by 2020. So whether it's through the CIP, or it's through operational changes that aren't in the CIP, or it's through credits, that's a conversation that's coming up on the horizon about how we get to carbon neutral. This is one of the tools to get there, but there's more.
Yeah, and what I'm leaning towards is, do you think that in the future, because capital improvements almost always are going to add greenhouse gases, you know, whether it's roads or, I mean, you can get efficiencies, but you're never going to be able to claw all those back. Do you think that part of the future budgeting for capital improvements should include offsets that we need to put in there? So if, you know, we're spending $318 million on, and it's adding this much GHG, do you think that maybe there should be $20 million in offsets that go to help that? I'm just putting that out there, and I'll go to a second round.
Commissioner Fragala?
Yeah, thank you. I actually wanted to echo some of those sentiments. I really appreciated the amount that you did reference the climate recovery ordinance and some of the things you mentioned that were being done. Like, I found that road thing you described to be very interesting. I mean, it sounds like there's lots of little things that can add up along the way, but I also have concerns about the level that a lot of the capital improvement projects increase the GHGs and what we are going to do to offset that. And I'd love to hear if you have any ideas about that. Not that you're saying this is what we're going to do, but I mean, have you seen ways that other communities are thinking about this? Is there innovation out there? I mean, what can we be thinking about in the future as a city?
Well, I think, again, from when we're thinking about city facilities and energy use, natural gas burning, and then outside of the CIP, you know, fuel that we're using for vehicles, we have already built in a process by 2020 that says we need to be carbon neutral. So whether it is with credits or through operational reductions, that's something that already exists in the climate recovery ordinance. For the expenditures in greenhouse gas emissions that we have for things like paving projects or building new facilities, what I would point out is that the scale of those greenhouse gas emissions compared to the transportation sector for the community are very, very, very small. So part of what will continue to evolve is our ability to model not only, so right now, if we look regionally at our transportation system, there's tools that can say if we triple walking, triple biking, if we have this kind of mode share of transit and we have this percentage of electric vehicles. This is the change in greenhouse gas emissions for our transportation sector. What we don't have is a tool that says this particular investment in a path or a signal system or a street will lead to people changing to a different mode of travel. So I think as we move forward, there are some tools that are starting to evolve that help us make those, again, kind of data-led decisions on how to prioritize projects. And I think what we're going to find is that the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that we are putting out in maintaining our system, building new transportation facilities, unless it's a very, very large project like, you know, a new bridge or something like that, those are substantial, really aren't going to be the thing that we're worried about. It's going to be the change in how people use the system that'll have the really big shift in our community emissions. So I think that's our perspective right now, and that'll evolve.
I think there's something that's interesting to bring up, and it isn't in this CIP, but I know that the city of Eugene, or at least you guys can confirm this, has actually won awards and actually been given national recognition for our open space, our natural areas, that 3,000 plus square feet or acres, excuse me. So that offset, know that we already are actually very innovative in terms of amassing public lands that is not built on and creates wetland habitat. You know, you've got the Delta Pond area, you got West Eugene wetlands, you have the Ridgeline Trail. So I think it's probably important that when you bring, if questions like this arise, be able to have that holistic answer, because it's not what's happening today. You got to look at it as a big picture. I know we have a goal, but also evaluating what does the overall system look like? What are we doing? Yeah.
Yep, and I think those levels of complexity will be able to get a better handle on how they interrelate over time.
Commissioner Randall.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of tag on to what Commissioner Taylor said, the thing we need to keep in mind with the GHGs too is that initial cost, let's say, of building a road or a system or a building or that isn't usually the greatest amount of GHGs. It's the ongoing operation and maintenance. Just like with an automobile, the initial cost in, environmental cost of making that automobile isn't the real cost. The real cost are the tailpipe emissions over the life of that car. And so that's far beyond what that initial cost is. So I think keeping that in perspective as we look at different things, and I understand a road, once it's there, but the longer that road can last, if you've got a better base under it, then that in the long term spreads out those GHGs over a longer period of time. Yeah. And I think we need to always be cognizant of that long-term view.
Thank you. I just have a quick question about the public engagement on the project as a whole, as well as obviously individual projects. I mean, a lot of them are kind of maintenance and whatnot, but on some of the more, some of the multimodal transportation projects and things like that, as we've seen, can tend to draw controversy. And I'm just curious as to whether or not, there are outreach plans as kind of you go along on, in any of them that, I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know that's a good question, and I think that's evolving for us, and we've been having a lot of conversations internally about how we build more robust processes and start to interconnect different projects more easily for the public, so they understand not just the one that might be in front of their door, but the one that's 2 blocks away, so they don't feel blindsided when that one comes up. A lot of it has to do with what the level of impact of a project is. So, if we're going out on West 7th Place and we're changing the way those lanes work, we're doing kind of a light outreach to the businesses and property owners to let them know we're doing that. But really, in a lot of ways, it might work, better for them if we're talking about working downtown and we have impacts to parking or travel lanes, for vehicles, then we're having a much more engaged conversation. And an example is the Downtown Active Transportation Network project, 8th Ave, which is really the High Street and Pearl Street corridor, the 8th Avenue Streetscape and Complete Streets project. They intersect, they affect a lot of the same people. So we've been we've been working on building the outreach for those projects, connecting it to the town square, connecting it to the riverfront, connecting it to other things, so that we're not only talking about our transportation goals in those particular facilities, but what the overall goals are for downtown and what our vision is. So we haven't quite rebooted that and got it out to the public yet, but we're working on trying to tie those things together. And we're also working on more robust web engagement tools for people that interact that way.
Great, thank you.
So do you both have questions? Because I'd like to actually keep it to just a couple more minutes, so keep your questions super, and then afterwards, please just follow up directly with staff, Commissioner Baker, and then Commissioner Borowski.
Yeah, regarding the bikeways, again, a suggestion, whenever you're doing these major bikeways, although we don't like them now, there is a concern about safety on a lot of these. And it would be very inexpensive to drop some conduit now when you're digging up for, for feeding lights later on at a future date. In other words, you just drop some conduit in place, and it makes the cost of running electricity to the lights very inexpensive. Just that's a suggestion.
So I would say I don't think we have any new paths that we're talking about building that don't have lights. And in fact, there's a lot of lighting projects for existing paths in this CIP.
Okay. No, you just showed the example of that one path that I thought,
Oh, it has lighting.
okay.
Commissioner Borowski.
Last point that I'd like to make, and this is, you guys are gathering input because you're going to be presenting this to the city council, and I wanted to give you some input that hopefully will make it to city council in their deliberations on this document. And that's the building preservation and deferred maintenance. For years, we've had a deferred maintenance on our buildings. The industry standard says you should spend between 2% and 4% of your capital to fix and maintain your things. We're at about 1.7%, and we've been under 2% for decades. And I think that is something that should be brought up to the city council and made aware of. We took City Hall out of the facility condition report, and that made that look a lot better. But the library is now starting to fall in. When we put the library in, the facility condition report looked good again. We took City Hall out, it looks bad. It needs to be something that is brought up to the council that we're going to get into the same thing that we had happen with streets. Your deferred maintenance is going to get so high that you can't fix it. And it's something that needs to be brought up to the city council.
Thank you very much. That was a great presentation, very thorough, and appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Cold in here.
So this, see, each year, that's 2%. That's where we're at. Yeah.
But how does it relate to this?
Yeah, they were having some issues.
They let it get to red, and then
Log off.
Maybe,
when they tear it down, and the report looks better.
yeah, maybe they're waiting for some funding.
They are.
Is there funding dedicated to the heat
Yeah, maybe.
atrium?
Typically, there's like $30 million, and we get rid of all the other.
Of course, I have about 6 layers on them, so
There you go. Yeah, was that me? It's been something, we had some people that were talking about it when I first got
You guys have a presentation?
six.
Yeah, is Terry, well, that's what we do.
Yeah, I might start.
Whoever wants.
No, of course, you can come and go if you want. Yeah.
I ever do this.
No, they're not.
And you know what? You can always go.
Thank you. Yep, Ellen, yeah.
Yeah,
It's chasing, because
I know, right? So I need to remind you, you can go when you want to go. You can leave this group. They don't need, the 3 minutes that it takes you, you will not miss. And if you do,
I'll try not to snow.
yeah, I will let
So
you.
that was,
They don't know.
this was, the red, City Hall was there, the red was probably down to.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Huge building that they deferred the maintenance.
Commissioner Baker? Commissioner Baker? Commissioner Baker? Do you mind? Yeah, follow up after. That'd be great. Thanks. So I'm going to go ahead and continue. Commissioner Edwards will be right back. So we've got work session item River Road, Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan update, and Eric Brown. And I'll let everybody else introduce themselves and their role.
We're having a bit of a technical.
Okay, so do you not want to start yet?
I think we might be good.
Okay.
Yeah, I was afraid that was going to be a circle of death.
Are you looking for a jump drive?
Yeah.
Here, let me do that for you. You can.
You know, at least we can start with intro.
So thanks for having
Is that
us.
me or is that?
Welcoming.
I thought it was from.
Above,
From above. There's a computer.
from above.
I just wanted to make sure my.
Computer doing something.
Go ahead, I'll find it.
Sure. So my name's Eric Brown, project manager and associate planner in the planning division, project manager for the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan. And I'm joined by Louisa DeHeer, who is co-chair of the Community Advisory Committee for the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan, hailing from River Road, and Kate Purley, her Santa Clarian counterpart, as well as Audrey Stewart, who is a planning technician in the planning division as well, and who's been assisting with this project. So we're here to provide an update on how things have been going in River Road Santa Clara, talk about some of the policy development work that we've been doing over the past 4 or 5 months since we were last here, and the launch of a corridor study along River Road. So looks like we got our PowerPoint up and ready to go.
There you are, sir.
Thanks, Robin.
Take it away.
So we'll provide a bit of an overview of the project, just for folks who may not have been on Planning Commission when we were last here, and as a reminder to Planning Commissioners who were here but may have other things on their mind in the intervening months. We'll talk about the policy development phase, as I mentioned, followed by the corridor study. We'll talk about where we're headed over the next couple of months. We've got a bit of administrative work with a CAC nomination to deal with, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. So I think it's important, as we think about River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan as a model for other neighborhood planning processes across the city, it's important to remember the work that the SCRIPT, the Santa Clara River Road Outreach and Learning Project, as well as, that was SCROLL, and then SCRIPT was the Santa Clara River Road Implementation Planning Team. The work that they did over 7 years to reach out to neighbors, understand their interests, understand their concerns, and their ideas for how the neighborhoods would improve over time and what they were looking for in a neighborhood planning process. So we've really based our work on the good work of neighborhood organizations that preceded the city coming to the table. This is a collaborative effort between the River Road Community Organization and the Santa Clara Community Organizations. As I said, have been working together for a long time on this planning process. The city and Lane County joined the table just under 2 years ago. I also want to talk a little bit about our model for public involvement, because I think we're forging new territory as we move through the planning process. So at the core of our public involvement model is the project management team. And Kate and Louisa both sit on the project management team. It's also staffed by City of Eugene planners as well as Lane County planners. So that's the core group of people that are making daily decisions about when events are going to happen, how we're going to approach certain things, the work that needs to get done in between some of the larger meetings that happen with broader members of the community. So part of those broader circles is the Community Advisory Committee. So Kate and Louisa, as I mentioned, are co-chairs of the Community Advisory Committee. There are members of the Community Advisory Committee from both River Road and Santa Clara. They were nominated by the community organizations and appointed by the Eugene Planning Commission. They serve to represent the neighborhood interests, make sure that as the project evolves and as we move through the planning process, that we're course correcting on a real-time basis, and ensuring that the planning process is reaching out to neighbors and that it remains neighborhood-based. So they really act as a steering committee for the planning project. And as I mentioned, nominated by the community organizations, they're all either residents of the neighborhood and in one case, a business owner in the neighborhood. In addition to the Community Advisory Committee, we have 5 topic area working groups. So the neighborhood plan has 5 topic areas: economic development, parks, natural resources, land use, transportation, and community. So each of those 5 topic areas has a working group. And the working groups were designed to meet members of the community where they are. So members of the community can come to one meeting and not the other. They can come to a whole string of meetings and then bow out if their time doesn't allow them to participate. So it's really meant to give people the opportunity to dive into the details of those 5 topic areas, but not scare away people with too much commitment. So we want to meet people where they are and give people the opportunity to participate at the level that they're able. Finally, the general public. We reach out to the broader neighborhood on a fairly regular basis through our interested parties email list, which now has 1,300 individual email addresses. There's obviously 32,000 residents in the 2 neighborhoods, and we reach out to them directly by going door to door, not necessarily reaching every door, but we have a team of volunteers who tries to get to as many doors as possible in the neighborhoods to invite them to public events. We send direct mailings to every address in the neighborhood when we're having a public event, and we're really doing our best to reach out as broadly as we can to all households in the neighborhood. That, I think, wraps that slide up. I wanted to provide a bit of an overview on the project phases. So we kicked this project off with a big public meeting in October of 2017 when we had over 400 neighbors show up at North Eugene High School and tell us about their hopes and dreams for the neighborhood, the things that they valued in the neighborhood, and the things they wanted to see protected and enhanced. And we turned that data that we collected in October into neighborhood visions. So the next phase of the project was visioning. From visioning, we moved into neighborhood priorities. We recognized that within the data, there were some tensions or rubs, key questions that needed to be asked in order to understand where the neighborhood wanted us to head. And so that neighborhood priorities phase included our second big public event. We held 2 events this time. The total number of participants approached 350, just over 300 people showed up at those 2 events. We also had an online component to that neighborhood engagement. So there was a parallel survey that asked people the same questions that attendees at the events were able to answer. So again, that was sort of the broadest level of outreach that we were able to do. From neighborhood priorities, we moved into policy development, which is where I'm going to turn it over to Louisa to talk about policies.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to take us basically from July until December. And over the summer, the CAC got together and distilled those big ideas from the vision statements and turned them into goals, turned them into 19 goals that we're kind of trying to drill down a little bit and figure out what is the big idea in this particular area. We then winnowed it down to 18 goals. So then at our August working group meeting, the CAC posted all of those goals up on the wall. And we invited all of our neighbors to stand up and walk around and read the goals and think about what they would get excited about if they wanted to see that goal and maybe personally participate in seeing that goal happen, maybe digging in. How could we do that? What data do we need to know? And so people got to sign up and say, I want to do that. I want to learn about how we can mitigate climate change at a neighborhood level. And then each CAC member took on 1 or 2 of those goals as goalkeepers. And we met with the folks who had signed up. Often they were in teams of 4 or 5 or 8 for each goal. And we met at people's houses, we met in cafes, we talked online. And over the next 3 months, we took those big ideas and tried to figure out policy language. The crack at policy language is, I don't know if anybody's written policy, but it's hard, and we're not policy, and we're not planners, we're neighbors. And so that was a great opportunity for us to talk through what's the intent of this? What is is this the language we want to use to get this idea across? Is this a policy or is this an action? That came up a lot. And how does this, parks policy over here potentially impact this economic development policy that we're coming up with over on this side of the room? So we would bring back each round. You can see there the policy is actually up on the wall. And people would sit down at tables and look at the drafts that they come up with and give real-time feedback to other groups and say, I'm not working on your goal, but here's what I think. Here's an idea I have on this goal, or let's push this idea. And we worked through that three iterations with all of our neighbors until we came up with a set of policies under each goal. Those ranged from 2 or 3 to 6 or 8, depending upon the area. And then the CAC took over all those policy drafts and had dedicated review meetings. I think we did 5 2-hour meetings in a month on each of the topic areas. And the goal was to look for gaps and overlaps, cross-references, where one policy in community that I worked on might positively reinforce a policy in transportation, where we'd find those synergies, those places where a big idea was being approached from multiple areas, and making sure that was strengthening language as opposed to detrimental language. And so this was about November. And so up until that point, we'd looked at all these policies from kind of siloed topic areas, community, economic development. And we had an opportunity in December to bring the whole team back together with a community working groups, as well as members of our technical advisory committee, and kind of share out what we'd done and get feedback. And so we decided to do that in sort of a policy roundup with a new lens, looking at major themes that had come to the surface during the whole data gathering process and in lots of conversations with our neighbors. Themes like safety or climate change mitigation, human health, things like that. And so we wanted to step back a little bit and say, how many policies and in what of these areas are covering this? And does that look like a complete picture that's going to address those big concerns that our neighbors have? So after all of that, we ended up with these 18 planning goals and about 75 policies.
Which you all have in your pack.
Which you can all read. So at the current moment, we're now receiving and reviewing feedback from our technical advisory committee, who took a long look at everything we've come up with and reviewed it for feasibility and policy alignment with other things happening in the city or the county. And also the Triple Bottom Line Sounding Board, who are giving us feedback on value alignment and making sure that we're being really thoughtful stewards of our community and our planet and our future. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Eric.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the corridor study that we just launched. So as we move through this planning process with the community organizations and with neighbors, it's clear that River Road is an important asset in the community, but it also it poses a barrier to connectivity across the neighborhoods. There's safety considerations, safety concerns about the corridor. There's also a whole lot of potential for economic development and land use development along the corridor. So we were successful in obtaining the largest grant that the city of Eugene has ever received from the FTA, $450,000 to support land use planning along the corridor. So we're not looking at the right-of-way, we're looking at land use development along the outside of the curbs. This is the study area. It covers the Chambers connector in the south. So if you turn your heads on your side, Chambers connector in the south, Hunsaker is at the north, so the far left-hand side of the slide. The black dash lines represent a 1.25 mile buffer from the corridor, which are generally considered walking distance to the corridor. The red bubbles that are in dashed lines as well, those are what we're calling neighborhood centers. And that's where our consultant team, Sarah Architecture in Portland, is going to develop proposed code amendments that will help implement the community vision, the neighborhood vision along the corridor. So the neighborhood vision, as I mentioned, really emphasizes the importance of River Road, both the barriers and the opportunity that exists there. And so this corridor study helps us in a number of ways. First off, it provides additional resources for demographic and economic analysis in both neighborhoods. That economic and demographic analysis will support looking at economic feasibility along the corridor of development. What kinds of development might we see along the corridor? It'll also help us flesh out some of the conceptual designs along the corridor. So what kinds of development do people want to see? And then help us develop the code to actually get those things built. So there's four very tangible ways that the corridor study supports implementation of the neighborhood vision. And with that, I will turn it over to Kate to talk about, oh, yeah, okay. I think you only have one slide.
So our introduction to the corridor study began in October when the team from Sarah Architecture came down to Eugene, and we met them at Reality Kitchen, which is a little eatery along River Road, on the south end of River Road. And they all came with bicycles, and members of the CAC and our community organizations met them there, and they got some context for their planning process from us. We got to express what we thought the neighborhood values were, the neighborhood vision for its future was, what some of our greatest challenges are, and then we proceeded to go with them and bicycle the corridor all the way up to the proposed transit station at Hunsaker, and detour at little places along the way. So by Echo Apartments, and we could talk about the parking issues and how it affects the neighbors with that kind of densification, or along the river path, and they could understand the value of that alt mode arterial that really adds value to our neighborhood, and how that creates other kinds of opportunities set back from the road a bit. And they got to experience in real time the terror of being a bicycle commuter up along River Road, and what that feels like with no barrier between yourself and cars, you know, in a 5-lane road. It can be, for people who don't generally bicycle, it can be a pretty daunting experience. And so we thought that would really help give them the context to think about what we're doing in a way that was more tangible and less theoretical. So we started like that, and then the chief designer had come down to a couple of our meetings and attended the policy roundup that Louisa was talking about to get yet more background around the neighborhood plan, and understand that for the neighbors to participate in the corridor study, the corridor study is a subset of our neighborhood plan and is designed to implement the neighborhood plan goals and visions just along the corridor, where the broader neighborhood plan is for the entire reach of our 2 neighborhoods. And in February, they came down and organized a design charrette. So 3 days back to back that were held at the Second and Chambers fire station there, because there's a little public room in there. And it was organized that at the beginning of the day, each of those 3 days, there was a brief meeting with the project management team, and members of the CAC were welcome to be there and provide feedback. And at the end of each day, there was a 2-hour open house. So members of the public could come, and they could give feedback in real time about what was going on with the design project, and could see perhaps their feedback incorporated in the next day's design work. To get residents to come to this corridor study charrette, we mailed to all the residents along River Road, and with staff and neighborhood volunteers, we canvassed, knocked on the doors of over 200 businesses and personally invited them to attend, and provided a business roundtable luncheon. So the very first day between 12 and 1, understanding that business owners don't have time to come to long meetings and 3-day design charrettes, but we wanted to make sure that they had a particularly directed time to give feedback and express what their values and concerns were. We provided a luncheon for them. They came, they dined while they shared with us the barriers they have to thriving or barriers they have to expanding their businesses. They got to express what they thought could be changes to help them be more successful. And we had an interesting mix of businesses. We had the business owner of the Corner Market, which is down there at the very south end of Thomason Lane, this tiny little fresh produce market that sources all food within 100 miles for sale. And we had the general manager from Grocery Outlet who was there as well. And the Peace Health Medical Clinic further north in Santa Clara was there. And so an interesting mix of business owners from the very small to the much more large scale or corporate. And it was interesting to hear their experiences. For instance, the manager from Grocery Outlet said to us that it doesn't pay him to advertise for business outside of our area because they track their customers by asking for your zip code when you purchase something. And he said over 95% of his business comes from 97404. So it's a testament to the neighbors' willingness and interest in supporting our local businesses in our neighborhood. So that was interesting for us to hear from the business owners, and it was interesting for them to hear from us that this broader neighborhood plan that encompasses more than just the corridor has an entire economic development topic area, and that some of the policies our neighbors have come up with are creating a River Road Santa Clara Business Association or a buy local campaign or a local brand that we could have ourselves, that we have discussed creating policies around co-locating complementary businesses to increase the synergy of their performance if they're located next to each other, and a strong commitment to growing the businesses that already are located in our neighborhood instead of just trying to attract new business to try to create economic vitality. So they were heartened to hear that the neighbors are working towards a kind of inclusivity for them as well as residents, as well as homeowners, or I guess if you would say. So each evening for the 2-hour open houses, we had between 60 and 80 residents come to those and participate. On the second day for lunch, we had the technical advisory committee come in and review the work. And that was important because they could review concepts and provide their technical expertise to the work as it was happening in real time. And on the third day, as the drawings kept progressing and the ideas kept moving along, the third day's open house was a little bit rockier. We had a group of residents who expressed a certain level of fear. There were questions about annexation. There were comments about sewer wars. There was comments about historical distrust of the city. And it showed us as residents that we had people who were brand new to the process. They hadn't been part of the neighborhood planning process at all. They weren't aware of what the corridor study really was. And it showed us how we have to give a much more thorough contextual background for them so they can understand that the corridor study, it has a limited scope in size and charge for change, and that the entire neighborhood planning process that is a longer running project and incorporates a lot more of our neighborhood, and express to them that they have the opportunity to get involved and to help guide the future of these places that they care so deeply about, and not just react to a finished plan that's given to them. So personally, I felt relieved that finally at one of our events, there was this voice, this discordant voice, because I know it exists in our neighborhood, and we just haven't heard it so far. And it gave me a little, there's the double-edged sword there, a little bit like, oh, but also helped me realize that I've been waiting actually to hear it, and that it's a healthy signal for me, because what it galvanized for me is that this is really a long exercise in educating our neighbors about what a resident-led collaborative project really is, and that this is a brand new dynamic. It's not something we've done before. It's not something that's been done for us, and it's characterized by frequent course corrections and a deep faith I have that the most creative solutions bubble up from some very unlikely sources. And so it has recommitted me to the idea that the greatest chance for success is that we need to keep involving as many residents as we can and make sure that all that creative upwelling is incorporated in the final plan. So, yeah.
Thanks, Kate. So on next steps, we are quickly coming to the end of the policy development phase. It's been a lot of work. It's taken us longer than we anticipated. A lot of back and forth, a lot of meetings, a lot of hard work by the community advisory committee members and working group members. But I think we're all kind of excited to wrap this phase up and move on to action planning. So we'll have a community event, probably a couple of community events again in early April. We're just working on solidifying the dates, but tentatively we're on for the 7th and 10th of April. And that will be an opportunity for the community to come in and see all of the hard work that residents have done on behalf of their neighbors on policy development. So they'll get to see all of the policies that have been developed so far, as well as the goals and vision statements. From policy development, we move into action planning, and this is where we get to talk about all the things that we're going to make, do, create to implement those policies and implement the neighborhood vision. We'll talk about timing, we'll talk about scope, we'll talk about how long it will take, who's going to be involved, who needs to be at the table, all of that good stuff to make sure that we have an action plan that explores all of the nuances of actually implementing a neighborhood plan. And then we move towards adoption. And so adoption, we are targeting for fall of this year, so that is coming up pretty soon. And so we're all working hard to get there. And I'll turn it over to Audrey to talk about the CAC appointment.
So as has been previously described, our CAC plays a really important decision-making role in this process. And it's actually built into the project charter that the Planning Commission approves nominations. So on January 9th of this year, we had Rebecca Sprinson, one of our members, resign due to personal reasons and the time commitment. And Luke Callahan, who was served as an alternate from the River Road community, was offered the position of a full CAC member and accepted it. We're sorry to see Rebecca go, but we're very excited to have Luke join us. So in your packet here tonight, there's a suggested motion to approve the nomination of Luke Callahan.
So does anybody have any questions regarding the CAC appointment discussion? Does anybody want to make a motion?
I move to adopt or appoint Luke Callahan to the CAC.
I second.
Okay. It's, you have the Commissioner Bobrowski and Commissioner Baker. Yep. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
It's unanimous.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And with that, we'll turn it over to you for questions and discussion about anything that we presented here tonight or anything that we missed.
Okay. Yeah, I've got Commissioner Ramey and then Commissioner Baker and then Bobrowski.
Thank you. Wow, wonderful presentation and great to see such what appears to be a grassroots involvement. Certainly by being here tonight is clear evidence, but I know how difficult that is to manage, and I'd love to talk to you offline maybe about how you did that, because that's really amazing. So congratulations to all of you for doing that. And then I had a couple of really specific questions. Maybe I'll just take one question. Kristen, I'll circle back, but it's about how the two studies are coordinated, the corridor study and the neighborhood, what I'm thinking of as a refinement plan. Yep. I may not be the right title, but and the timing of them, one appears to be more towards implementation action items. So, for example, is it going to test out some of the policies from the neighborhood that the neighborhood suggested, and then they can be refined later? I mean, you see what I'm talking about? If you do them in sequence, you can leverage that work.
Yeah, I think that the timing works out really well for the corridor study, and Kate and Louisa, jump in if you feel like I'm missing anything. But I think that the corridor study times really well with the neighborhood plan. So the neighborhood plan, as we talked about, went through a visioning and goal-setting process. And so by the time we had that framework in place, and they're all still in draft format, they can continue to change and evolve. But we feel confident that they've been vetted by the community enough that we can move forward with designing neighborhood center concepts and eventually code around those visions. So it helps us move towards implementation. And so it'll be on a parallel track with the neighborhood plan in terms of policy implementation and action planning. So we basically, we had the vision and goals in place. We could start corridor study work. They have mostly to this point been doing demographic and economic analysis. And now as we move forward into action planning, we start to talk about code and implementation of concepts along the corridor.
And I think one other place that it dovetails nicely is that while the corridor study itself only goes to Hunsaker, of course, Santa Clara goes much farther and has businesses up higher, and there are other areas which might have really similar conditions, and some of the demographic information or economic study information could affect our ability to make code amendment recommendations in other areas beyond the corridor.
Yeah, that's exactly, yeah, perfect. Okay, Commissioner Borowski.
Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry, I actually went in line, if you don't mind, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Great work. Great process that you guys have been going through for the last 7 years. But I guess I have kind of question as far as how this implements citywide, because we're the planning commission for the city of Eugene. You know, if I wanted to say, this is how I want my block to look, I've got ideas. This is how I want my 3 blocks to look, I've got my ideas. This is how I want my 5 blocks, my neighborhood to look. When I'm sitting in this chair, I have to say, this is how I need the city of Eugene to look. And so one of the questions that I have that I didn't really see, and I hope that you guys have looked at, is we have a Envision Eugene document that's been put out that says we're going to grow this much in the next 20 years. And we're going to need to have this many dwellings. And there's a buildable land inventory, and we know how much buildable land is in Santa Clara, Eugene, and that area. And I hope that you guys at some point have looked and said, okay, we need to figure out where we're going to put our share of those dwellings. Because if I say I want my block to look like this, but I don't want an apartment in my block, I would put it in my goals. I want my block to look without multifamily. So that's one point that, and then the next thing is, again, I looked at a lot of these goals and I'm wondering how, because they're very aspirational and very touchy-feely, okay? And code, when somebody comes to us and we have an appeal, one of the things that we look at is an area plan. And being able to say, is this goal applicable to a code, or how do you get that goal into code is going to be a tough lift, I think, on some of these goals. So, you know, I heard, what do we want to see built here, right? Again, what do I want to see built on my block may not be what can be built on my block. You know, I would love to have a beautiful park and a nice house and lots of open space, but that's not economically feasible to do. So has that been thought of as well? Those are just some comments.
I feel like Louisa and Kate have been chomping at the bit to answer
Go for it.
that question.
So back when we were doing our neighborhood priority setting phase, when Eric was expressing that we had the broadest level of community involvement, we asked residents to discuss what we called sticky points or rubbing places. And one of those was about density and about where, not if we need to accommodate density, but we do, and how do we want to do it? Do we want to densify solely along the corridor? Do we want to spread it out evenly everywhere, ADUs and little cottages everywhere? Do we want to do a hybrid of that, where there's some densification, more multifamily along the corridor, and then also along many of our arterials, having not 5-story densification, but more duplexes, townhouses, more compatible with a single-family residential kind of densification. And overwhelmingly, in our neighborhood, the residents chose the one that's the hybrid of the two. So they didn't want to cluster all densification along the corridor. They wanted it to come out to the neighborhoods as well, but in a sensitive and well-designed way. And I think that that's perfectly acceptable and reasonable in terms of, and reachable as a goal to codify and to make that happen.
So the question actually baked in our assumptions about population growth. And just as you were suggesting, we said you're going to have, I think the number was 8,000 new residents by 2032. Where are those people going to live?
Correct.
Yeah.
So I guess getting back to it is, we'd like it to be this hybrid type of thing. But is that realistic economically? Are those storefronts actually going to be built because they pencil out to be built, or is it phantom? It's like a builder's not going to go in if it's not going to pencil out to build that type of housing. So.
Well, there are examples of that kind of housing all over Eugene. I don't understand. I mean, that's not my level of expertise.
Right.
But I can tell you, it's not as though I look around town and say they don't exist.
Right.
It's just there's not a overabundance of them in our neighborhood yet. And, I think that's the future brings a level of uncertainty about a lot of things, but population intensification isn't one of the uncertain things. And we can count on that being a motivating force for developers, just as it is for people who are trying to plan the future of their neighborhoods. So exactly how that works for them economically is a mystery to me and not something I'm likely to unravel.
And hopefully we'll unravel it to a certain extent with the corridor study, with the analysis that we're doing there. And I think, I think their work is really focused on the corridor, and so it might not fully translate to other parts of the neighborhood, but I think that we'll start to head down that road and do that analysis. We definitely want to do that analysis.
I'm trying to remember what the second part of your question was. There was something else, because I was
Well,
gonna...
I mean, I guess and that's good. Again, I'm looking at Eugene as a whole.
Right.
So if we codify something that won't get built, those 8,000 storefronts are going to be built somewhere else, and it may push it to an area that's.
I understand.
So let me rephrase the question, just because this might help for you guys to provide insight about your process, was in part of the 7 years, did you look at some of the plans? And actually, Transportation did or Public Works did a very good job of the relevant plans, right, for each of the sections of the CIP, or you might have not been here, but it was the agenda item before you. Did you look at all of the relevant adopted planning documents, or maybe not even adopted, to look at what's viable? So just touch on that. That might help address Commissioner Borofsky's question, are you are you looking at viable options as you look at your planning process?
The language in the goals might be touchy-feely, but we're not. We're pretty pragmatic folks. I worked on the transportation goals. We have 3 goals around transportation. One of our CAC members is a retired ODOT staff member who worked in multiple commissions around the state for years in transportation and brought her expertise to that. We spent hours looking at the TSP, Transportation System Plan, thank you, as well as the parts of Envision Eugene that have been published. So whatever documents were suggested to us by our TAC members for transportation, that would be Rob Interfeld and other folks in that office, said, hey, you might want to look at this. Hey, have you talked about this policy? Here's something that's overlapping with what I think you're working on. Take a look at that. And so we used all that language and found places where, we'd like to have the county take a look at an area and how the Northwest Expressway intersects with the Beltline. And so there's areas of our neighborhood that require play and conversations among multiple agencies across the area. And so we wanted that language to be robust and very clear.
Every topic area, so every goal has a technical advisory committee member. So we've got planners, we've got parks system planners, and human rights and neighborhood involvement, other agencies as well. So county and LTD are all weighing in on policies as they're being developed. And that feedback is being integrated into next versions of the policies. So.
And then just feedback about the goals being touchy-feely, that I think the intent of the goals is not to be too specific, but that they're modified by the given direction by the policies, and the policies are robustly informed by the action planning. So reading even just the policies alone can be a little bit uncertain, but there is a robust action plan that informs every one of those policies and makes it, I think, pretty clear what the intent of the language is.
Yeah. One other thing that I would mention, is the TBL sounding board that we struck. So this was kind of a new endeavor for the city of Eugene to have representatives of various boards and commissions, official bodies. Commissioner Taylor, Chair Taylor? Commissioner Taylor was representing the Planning Commission at the TBL Sounding Board. And so we had representatives from the Sustainability Commission, from the Budget Committee, from Active Transportation Committee, various boards and commissions to give that citywide perspective, because just as you say, this plan needs to nest inside our citywide policies and frameworks.
Commissioner Baker, thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to also thank you for a very nice presentation and a very thoughtful document here. I had one minor suggestion to goal 18, which would be
I'm taking notes.
increase resilience in local food, water, and I would add energy and disaster preparedness, because you have an opportunity. River Road in general, there's a lot of R1 and R2 zone land, and there is an opportunity to make certain that you have energy resilience as well. There are still some very modest solar zoning provisions in the code, and it would be nice to see them reinforced rather than negated by your plan, so that we do have areas where you are likely to be able to use a PV panel sometime. So that's a suggestion. And I also I appreciate Commissioner Borowski's comments. I wanted to also add that it's nice to have different parts of the city be different. We're not trying to create a uniform community that all looks the same in every place. And we have also I'd like to throw out that we may have a fundamental problem. We may have a goal of producing so many housing units in the city of Eugene, but because of economic conditions, we may not have a population that can afford that many units. And so even though we would like to produce that number of units, we might have a situation that some other jurisdictions have, Seattle and Portland, where they aren't producing the number of units they would like to meet the housing needs of the community. And, then other things happen.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Fragala.
Well, I did want to commend you on your public participation process. I had the opportunity to attend several meetings all along the way, and it's the first neighborhood refinement plan I've been involved with, but I have to say I enjoyed it a lot, and I think you're going to be a hard act to follow anywhere else in the city. I do think it represents a good model and that we should look at some of the systems that you utilized and try replicating them, but I do have a feeling that some of the things you've accomplished are going to be hard to replicate. I do think some of it is unique to your neighborhood. Kate, I thought you did a fabulous job at the last meeting providing leadership when that pushback came up. And I'd also like to let everyone else in the room know that having participated, I do think the leadership and the CAC have done a fabulous job in this whole process. And I do think that you are going to come to a more challenging part in the process now because those questions have popped up routinely. One of the things I'm curious about is, do you feel like you saw the corridor study, like the outcome of those 3 days? Did it actually reflect what you were hoping from in the larger plan? I mean, I know there was pushback. It was like that fear element did really come up in the meeting. But I also have talked to a lot of people that live in that area of the city. A lot of 4J early career educators live in that part of the city. A lot of young families with kids who attend the school system there, and they're craving economic development down that corridor, right? They want to see those businesses, they want to see those meeting places, they want to see the access to the river pushed through. So I do think that sentiment is really there, even though the voice of fear came up in the meeting. So did that corridor plan reflect like what you hoped it would reflect in terms of relating to the broader neighborhood plan?
I think the corridor planning process is still fairly nascent, right? So there isn't anything that came out of that we're presenting as a finished idea or the way forward. It's the first part of this. It's the first step in the exercise. So they were throwing out ideas based on what they'd heard from people and then adjusting them day to day. And so I think there will still be quite a lot of adjustment. But I think some of the principles that people had brought to the table through the neighborhood plan process and through the open houses at the end were definitely reflected in some of the work there. So I think it's a good beginning is how I look at it.
Yeah, I appreciated their willingness. Sarah Architects is really well known for sustainability in general. And so through this process, you know, the emphasis that our neighbors have on community gathering spaces, on thoughtful design that complements our neighborhood and thinks about our tree canopy while accommodating density. You know, we're asking for a lot of things all at once. And so, you know, they were really willing to say, oh, there's a great idea, and scrap what I just did, spent 3 hours doing. Let's reiterate this or rethink about that. And so that process, I think, gave neighbors that feeling of empowerment that in real time they were being heard. And so we're excited to see what comes out of it.
So I'm going to put myself in the queue. I'm just going to reiterate what everybody's been saying is that it's been really exciting. I actually was involved very, very early on, like before 7 years, when I was chair of Fairmount, because we did some of this process as well. And you guys met with us, and we kind of transferred it. And you guys have just grown the involvement and the participation from the neighbors. So I think I'm so excited. And it's been just phenomenal to see who's shown up. And so I think as a model, I would like to believe, I mean, it takes a lot of investment from neighbors. So I would love to see it replicated and, you know, at least parts and pieces as people are available. So because of that, I really want you to succeed. So I participated in the triple bottom line. I know we'll meet again. I'm a user of the code. So as in the architecture and planning, representing homeowner clients, developers, whether they're homeowners or true developers, they could be your neighbor. I want you to get to policies. Your goals are great. I want you to get to policies that actually get you to the solution. So I do have a question, because typically action items aren't what's adopted. It's the policy. So I want to see your policies actually communicate something that has teeth, that is understandable and usable. And I always look for that. When I get to a neighborhood, I'm like, shoot, look at that policy. You know, I want some teeth, because my values are very similar to yours personally. Yet I'm serving clients who are asking for things sometimes, and I want to be able to honor adopted plans and policies. And when I get to a policy that I'm like, yep, this is not clear, you actually can do what you want. So, and I know it's contrary potentially to the intent, but there's only so far I can go, right? Unless I let go of that client, which is an option. So your policies, I would just go through, make sure your language is consistent with other plans and policies. Don't try to create new words. So wherever that consistency, and I see a couple new words that actually are terms that are used differently in other plans. The other thing is wherever there's a question of what something means, like for instance, goal 11, 11.3, you want lasting construction, building design and construction, create a lasting addition to the built environment and contribute positively to the public realm. What do those two things mean? So really taking a look at and asking, maybe talk to people that are users, and I'm willing to sit down with you and kind of break it apart to tell you what does that mean from the perspective of me being able to know how to actually support you. I mean, I know what that, personally, I could maybe even have a different interpretation of that. I feel like I'm value aligned, but maybe I'm not, right? And this isn't giving me enough clear direction. So there's quite a few of these policies like this, and we kind of talked about in the TBL, you were getting some of that feedback. So I would just say, spend some time, maybe talk to specific targeted people, have a little charrette, like what would you do with this? What would it look like?
Little black hatting.
Yeah, yeah, and I could play that devil's advocate, okay, yeah, I'm here. And what am I going to do with this policy? The same with staff, because they're the ones that as code amendments made or a code is made in order to actually support the policy, can you actually write code and understand how to write code that's applicable to this policy? So that's my only feedback. It's broader, but I'm willing to. Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I was trying to get to when I said it was wishy-washy.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be clear so that if it does come back to us, we can say, no, this is what they meant. You know, not a developer saying, no, I think this is what they meant. That's what I was kind of trying to get to as well.
We want to propose code that would be, which would be referred to for most land use applications. Like most land use applications kind of go directly to building permit. And so we want to make sure that the code reflects the policies. But what I'm hearing here is that those higher level land use applications as well, the ones that come to you all, you want the policies to more clearly indicate what the neighborhood is after.
And you want that also. Otherwise, you'll have unintended consequences. Like I had a project, Chase, if you go down Chase Village, the medical offices there, the neighborhood wanted a grocery store. It was a process, and there was code amendments made, but it wasn't in the code explicitly. So there are 3 medical giant, I mean, they're a great asset to the larger community, but the actual neighborhood surrounding it, it wasn't what they wanted. So you don't know what those unintended consequences are. Yeah. So try to figure out as many as you can. Get it clear. Yeah. No more questions?
Anything else?
Okay. Awesome job. Inspirational. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So items from commission and staff. I know we only have about 4 minutes. Any commission items? Okay. Oh,
Well, I can
yes.
just report out on the, since Sue's here, on the Sustainability Commission, I'm the liaison to that.
Okay.
And a lot of what they were talking about, if you have a chance, go see the Good Company's report on the Community Action Plan 2.0.
Oh, great.
And they're looking at how the community, where we are currently, how far well, I can tell you how far we're below the goal or above it. Well, anyway, we're not meeting the goal. And then what it's going to take to meet the goal in the terms of the ordinance. It's fascinating. If you're interested, I don't know if you've seen it, Steve, but if you're interested in that kind of stuff, it's really interesting. Like, we need 75,000 electric vehicles. That would solve like a pretty big fraction of the problem. But the challenge is there's only 750 electric vehicles currently in Eugene.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Items from staff. Because I know we have a packed schedule, right?
Yeah,
Upcoming.
well, yeah, and due to last week's snowpocalypse, there's some more, or snowmageddon, either one.
Snowmageddon.
Yeah,
You're trying
either
to-
way. There's some reshuffling happening, and there's also potential appeal coming up. And one of the main things we want to do is try to make sure that we have time for you all to walk through the downtown riverfront code amendments. And that's probably the most time-constrained project that we're looking at, in addition to trying to get a few other things in there. So I know I keep forecasting this big crunch, and I promise you it's coming, and it's probably in May, maybe early June now too. So there will be some more polls coming your way, and just thank you for your patience. Interestingly, just in terms of scheduling, the last few months have been one of the most tumultuous times that I've seen since I've been here. And I think part of that is just we're trying to do a lot, at the same time right now. I think we all feel that. A couple other items. In terms of Planning Commission recruitment, I actually misspoke last time, and I apologize to Commissioner Ramey that he was actually in the recruitment process. You were filling the last part of a former commissioner's vacant position, and so the deadline for applying, and you would have to reapply, is March 10th, so that's Sunday evening, and I think you got an email today with that too. So I think we'd initially discussed that when you first came on, but I had just forgotten in our last discussion to bring it up again, so apologies for that. However, we do have a pretty good slate of applicants. I think we have about a dozen so far, so that's actually really good. For all the boards and commissions, actually, but I think there were the most for the Planning Commission. So whatever y'all have done to get the word out, it's
I think you guys, it's your
maybe
list
us,
of the to-dos.
whatever it
Like,
is.
I'm going to get in.
There are just all kinds of exciting things going on that people
Yeah.
want to be a part of, so that's a great thing.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Those interviews that they have at council, are those open to are those on, can you watch the webcast or?
Yeah.
I can't remember. I
You
didn't
can
know.
go.
Yeah, you can go
can
and sit
go?
there and watch them, yeah.
I hope they're changing it this year, because the way they did it last time was atrocious.
And that was the first time they did it that way, so we might want
Yeah.
to check and see what the policies, or what their.
Yeah, if I had an
was?
update on that, I'd share it with you. I would assume at this point that
Yeah.
it's probably going to be the same as last year, but I haven't heard anything different, okay? And I'll let you know if I do.
Okay.
Couple other things. One is, I think you got an email today, you may not have seen it yet, but it was an update from Alyssa Hansen on the result of some of the legal actions that have passed through this body over the past 5 years. Some of those are resolving, some of them are more recent. So take a look at that. I think there's been some really, just some good outcomes in terms of supporting decisions that have been made here. Let's see, what else? One other thing. Yeah, I also sent out a fair amount of research regarding the question about whether you can have some kind of behavioral standards for folks that are providing public testimony. And I'm happy to have a longer conversation about that, not tonight, but that's out there for us to digest whenever we're ready for it.
If you can do me a favor and just grab what kind of is any policy that exists now at the city for public process.
Yeah, it's pretty
Resurrect
much,
that.
it's all in there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all in that email. There should be,
Okay.
if the links aren't working,
Okay.
take a look. They're
Okay.
probably,
Okay, so you, great.
yep.
Okay.
It's everything that I could find.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, I will be out for a couple of weeks. So, but you're in good hands,
Okay.
always.
Would be in great hands, right?
These hands right over here.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming, kind of short notice, I think, or shorter notice, right? So thank you. And we'll adjourn.